This is the Unit 9, the Cold War. You're gonna follow, copy it in the notebook as always. You have the pages. This is the vocabulary. You can find it the same in the booklet. The origins of the Cold War. This is the first point. We are in pages 198 and 199. Firstly, we have to answer to what's the Cold War. The Cold War was a period of permanent, tense international relations in between 1947 and 1991. During this time, the world was divided in two really opposed, antagonist groups or blocs. Each of them was led by superpowers. One superpower was the United States and the other was the Soviet Union. They were allies. They had collaborated in the Yalta and Potsdam conferences. However, after the peace, they're gonna start having expansionist interests and antagonism is gonna grow more and more, creating this long period of tension. So, these two opposing blocs are the Western Bloc, which is led by the USA. In this bloc, we're going to have a capitalist economy. It's going to have democracies, but sometimes it's going to accept dictatorships in between or among the Western allies. For instance, the Franco dictatorship, not at the beginning, but later, is going to be accepted into the Western Bloc. And the Eastern Bloc, led by the Soviet Union, and that is going to have a socialist planned economy, which is well known as communist system, and it's not going to have democracies. Normally, it's going to have dictatorships. Dictatorships imposed by the Soviet Union. During this time, we are going to have several wars, but we are not going to have direct confrontation. And, well, where is coming this concept of Cold War from? It is coming from the journalist, which was called Lippmann, that in 1947, in an article, he set up this concept of Cold War, trying to establish this not direct confrontation. The other very important concept that is going to mark the Cold War period is going to be the Iron Curtain, and the Iron Curtain concept was established by Winston Churchill, which also in another intervention, in another speech, called this Iron Curtain to establish this symbolic border dividing two different worlds, two antagonist worlds. Which are going to be the characteristics of this long period. We are now in page 199. These characteristics are going to be first a bipolar order. Bipolar because we have these two great blocks. And as we said in class, Manichaeist. It has a great Manichaeism inside because each of the block is the good and the other is the bad. It's marked because of this. The two superpowers are going to have similar power, similar military and similar destructive capability, and this is going to lead to a tension, a permanent tension, because each of them could harm and destroy the other. The threat of the other bloc attacking was all the time present, and it is a permanent and very dangerous tension. The armed race is understandable. Like it's normal to think that if we have this bipolar order and this permanent tension, each of them are going to prepare for war all the time. This arms race is going to be set up in laboratories because they're going to try to improve the capability of damaging of the different weapons that we have. They're going to develop atomic bombs. They're going to keep developing the atomic bomb that was used for the first time during World War II, and also the hydrogen bomb, which is going to be even stronger. Also, they're going to develop the long-range missiles, which are going to be very important in some of the chapters of the Cold War, and the chemical weapons. Also, we're going to have the space race at the same time. You know who is the first man who set up a feet on the space? It was it. He is Yuri Gagarin, and it was the Soviet who led the space race. Then it was going to be the NASA who arrived to the moon for the first time. But this is a propaganda way of communicating the rest of the world their ability to develop a better technology than the other bloc. Propaganda is going to be very, very important. Both superpowers use extensive propaganda to strengthen their hold on countries of their area of influence. It's very important, for instance, in America, for the American opinion, because they are a democracy, but also for the rest of the countries inside their area of influence, like South America or Europe. This propaganda is going to be really aggressive, as we're going to see later some examples of this type of propaganda. The propaganda wanted to warn of the danger of allowing the other bloc in. The other bloc was terrible, was the worst, and we couldn't allow the other bloc to advance even a little. Well, the threat of war is going to be very important too. During the Cold War, this rivalry and mutual suspicion, they are always suspecting of the other, is going to lead to some moments of really, really big tension of another world war, the Third World War. A lot of people thought it was going to arrive during all these years, but it never arrived. But this permanent tension, this threat of war, was really, really present during some moments, some peaks of tensions. There was also moments of calm. Interventionism on regional conflict. As you know, we called it the Cold War because they never really fought directly, but they are going to fight in regional conflicts. They are going to intervene in regional conflicts. Actually, it's the intervention on two regional conflicts which is going to be the origin of the Cold War. It is said that it is the intervention in Greece, in the Greek Civil War, and in Iran, that really set up the start of the Cold War. One of the most famous, like you are seeing now, it's the Korean War. These areas, these two blocks are going to have really, really differentiated areas of influence. We are going to analyze a map later. And they are not going to have mindset influence, but direct political influence. And to develop all this policy, to develop all this antagonism, there's going to be a really, really interesting network of espionage and secret services. Very famous are the CIA and the KGB, and a lot of movies talking about this. And well, what's doing United Nations during all this time, during the Cold War? As you know, United Nations was created in the Conference of San Francisco at the end of World War II, and the purpose of United Nations was to intervene in this type of conflict and avoid greater conflicts. But what did United Nations? Well, the problem of United Nations is that the Security Council was controlled by USA and the Soviet Union because both of them had a veto. So they used to bid to use that veto to avoid the other bloc to take different measures against themselves. So it was quite ineffective as an intermediary. Well, these are some images showing what's the concept of Iron Curtain. That is ese telón de acero, the Iron Curtain, that is going from the Baltic to the Adriatic Sea. And this is the map, which is showing the two blocks. In orange, we have the Soviet Union, Russia, plus all the the Eastern Europe countries such as Poland, Estonia, Lithuania, etc. And we have China, which is going to become, it's going to have a revolution, it's going to become also communist. And then we have in green and greenish colors the allies of the United States. That Iron Curtain that goes from the Baltic in Europe to the Adriatic, yes. Some propaganda I told you I was going to use. The first one is saying red rape. It can happen here, like assimilating that the Soviets, the red, los rojos, were rapists. So imagine, it is a huge association. Red are all rapists. For us, it could be like a bit silly. So who is going to believe this association? All the Russians are rapists? No, but this is propaganda, and the propaganda power, it's very effective. Actually, we already saw it during the Nazi time. They developed a very, very powerful propaganda. And during the Cold War, the propaganda is going to be really big. Like in the United States saying, que viene el coco, it was used like the Russians are coming. It was very, 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 like children would be very, very afraid of the Russians. Another one, the second one, is this tomorrow, showing that how would be America under communism, like everything would be completely anarchy, would be a destroyed country. On the other side, we have the same. First, we have the US bomb, like it's being covered by a vision of peace. In this case, the Soviet Union is criticizing that the Americans are always talking about peace and democracy, but actually they are quite aggressive, and they develop a really aggressive foreign policy, which they always justify trying to say that they want peace. The second one is, the propaganda of the leader Stalin. We go now to the second part. The second part of the unit is called the Cold War blocks in page 200 and 201. We're going to start describing the Western Bloc, which is going to be led by USA plus the Western Europe, especially Great Britain. And, well, what are going to be the characteristics of this Western Bloc? First, they're going to be democracies, and they're going to be capitalist. Most of the countries in Western Europe are going to be part of it. Not Spain and Portugal at the beginning, which they are not going to be included because of being authoritarian regimes, not being democracies, but later they will be included. First, we have to talk about Truman. As you know, Truman is the President of the United States, Harry Truman. And well, in 1947, after the effects of World War II in Western Europe were devastating, these effects left very poor Europe with lack of infrastructures, with a lot of destroyed industries, without roads, without ports, without canals. So there was a need for a great investment in order to build again Europe. And people was poor. People were suffering. The post-war effect in the European countries was terrible. A lot of people was having a really bad time. So whenever people is really poor and is having bad time, the chance of feeling attracted by communism worried really much to the US administration, which thought that it was a possibility that Europe, being so close to the Soviet Union, communism would spread to the western part of Europe too. So under this threat, they are going to develop, Truman is going to be the one designing this strategy called the containment strategy, que es la estrategia de contención. Containment of what? Containment of the spread of communism. So Truman is going to be the first one in asking the Congress to allow him to intervene in Greece. Greece, we're going to talk about the Greece conflict later, when we study one by one all the great conflicts of the Cold War. But Truman is going to ask the Congress to allow him to intervene in Greece in order to win the war and stop communism, because the Greece war was in between the communists and the monarchists, the supporters of the monarchy, capitalists, and the supporters of communism. And the US is going to intervene firstly in Greece. It's going to be the first intervention of the Cold War as part of this containment strategy. They are going to say that they want to promote democracy and help Europe after the destruction, but I think it is greater the purpose of stopping the advancing power of the communism, because it was one of the greatest worries of the United States. The second part of the Cold War bloc is going to be the formation of the Marshall Plan. The Marshall Plan is going to be like the economic part of the Truman Doctrine, because if we need to make Europe not vulnerable for the communism, not prepared or ready or vulnerable for the communism spread, what do we have to do? They thought they had to increase or improve the economic situation of Europe. So they create the Marshall Plan. In 1948, they are going to the United States, bankers are going to give loans to different countries in Europe for the value of $13 billion, which is a lot, to reactivate Western Europe economies. This money is going to be invested in improving, the industries, the roads, all sorts of necessities, and all sorts of destroyed infrastructures that was a result of World War II. Especially France and England had the most destroyed parts. Not all the countries were received this aid. Some others were out. For instance, Spain. Spain was left out because it was not a democracy, but 17 countries benefited from this. It's very, very important, the Marshall Plan. It is like the economic part of the Truman Doctrine. We cannot understand one without the other. And finally, if we talk about politics, the last part of this Truman Doctrine, it would be the NATO. The NATO is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which was set up in 1949. This treaty established an international military alliance against all possible attack on the Western world. The initial 12 NATO members were these ones: Belgium, Canada, Denmark, USA, UK, France, Iceland, Italy, Luxembourg, Norway, the Netherlands, and Portugal. And I think of the Truman Doctrine. I'm gonna read the historical text. You have the full speech. This is an adaptation. Is adapted for being able to be understood on the textbook. But you can, if you click on the link, you can go to the full speech on YouTube. At the present moment in world history, nearly every nation must choose between alternative ways of life. The choice is too often not a free one. One way of life is based upon the will of the majority and is distinguished by free institutions, representative government, free election, guarantees of individual liberty, freedom of speech and religion, and freedom of from political oppression. The second way of life is based upon the will of a minority forcibly imposed upon the majority. It relies upon terror and oppression, a controlled press and radio, fixed elections, and the suppression of personal freedoms. So here you can see these opposing blocks and how Truman is representing the Soviet Union as the others, as the antagonist of the Americans and of the American way of life. You have to do, as part of the booklet activity in class, you have to do this text commentary, as well as the Marshall Plan speech. I read it as well. It is logical that the United States should do whatever it is able to assist in the return of normal economic health in the world, without which there can be no political stability and not assured peace. Our policy is directed not against any country or doctrine, but against hunger, poverty, desperation, and chaos. Its purpose should be the revival of a working economy in the world, so as to permit the emergence of political and social conditions in which free institutions can exist. Marshall Plan speech, which is, Marshall Plan is the economic version of the Truman policy, Some information about how the money that came from the Marshall Plan was spread among the different members of the NATO. You have United Kingdom getting the most, France is the second that got the most, Western Germany too, Belgium, Italy. And, well, do you think the Soviet bloc is going to see all of this, which was, of course, a policy trying to stop their influence from spreading over Europe, and do nothing? No, they are going to develop their own version of the same. The first is the Comintern, the Iron Curtain. They are going to create what's being called the satellite states. They are going to defend this creation, these satellite states, in order to defend the Soviet Union borders. They saw it was necessary to defend the borders of the Soviet Union communism. These countries are going to be Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Poland, Romania, and German Democratic Republic. These never chose to be part of the Soviet Union. As you know, Stalin had promised in the peace treaties, Yalta and Potsdam, to celebrate free elections in these countries, which had been occupied, which didn't choose to be occupied by the Soviets, which didn't choose to be communist. But these free elections never arrived. These satellite states are going to be occupied, military and political occupation by the Soviet Union, and they're going to have a communist economy. They are not going to have free democratic political systems, but they are going to be under the direct influence of the Soviet Union. The liberties are going to be suppressed, and no other political parties are going to be accepted. The Comecon, which is the Council of Mutual Economic Aid, it is the response to the Marshall Plan. They pretend to coordinate the economic plans of the member countries and set up a system of mutual help. It was actually, the response for the Marshall Plan, the same as the United States did in Europe. They're going to do it in the rest of the satellite states. It's the countries that are going to receive the money from the Comic-Con are going to be the same: Romania, Czechoslovakia, Poland, Bulgaria, and Hungary. And the next is going to be the Warsaw Pact. The Warsaw Pact, it's established in 1955, and it was established as a response for the founding of the NATO. In theory, the pact was a military alliance between the Soviet Union and the European countries in the Soviet sphere, actually the satellite states. But actually, in practice, it was an agreement that was used to impose order inside the Soviet bloc. Because, there's going to be some complaints and some revolts inside the satellite states that don't want to be oppressed under the Soviet Union. But when this happened, the Warsaw Pact is going to go to these places and establish and keep the order established by the Soviet bloc. This is the bipolar world. You can see the NATO countries and you can see the Warsaw countries. The NATO in dark blue, the Warsaw in dark red. And then you can see some allies, some pro-Soviets, which are in red, and some some pro-capitalism, which are in blue. Most of South America, Central America, of course, Europe, Western Europe, and a great deal of countries in Africa. But not the whole world was part of these two blocks. There were some other exceptions. And which political systems did have the exceptions, the ones that were not aligned with any other of the blocks? We have two examples: Yugoslavia, that was communist, or Switzerland in Europe, that decided to be capitalist. So, well, if you want to watch that video, which is a short version, super short and super quick version of the Cold War by a YouTuber that from a point of view, does good videos of history, I'm gonna write the link below. You can click on it and watch it. For this first lesson in class, I want you to do a diagram of these two first points from page 198 to page 201 and complete the following booklet activity. This is another documentary. Are the vocabulary parts that you can start answering. The end of part 1. Bye guys, see you.